Hello everybody and welcome to a plugin tutorial where I'm going to be showing you how you can make server-side NPCs without the use of any packets or NMS. Now this is only possible due to a very recent addition to the API called Mannequins, which were introduced in Minecraft 1.21.10, so you need to be using that version at least to be able to do this. Now I'm going to be showing you how you can spawn these entities and how you can modify the skin, the name, and interactions with left and right clicking. Now this is something that Minecraft developers like myself have been asking for ages, and I have to commend Mojang for finally adding a system to be able to do this. So for the purposes of this tutorial I'm going to be writing it in Java, but of course you can write it along in Kotlin. As you can see, I just have an empty Java plugin set up and I have my plugin.yml here, but I'm just going to be coding this from scratch and you can follow along. So the first thing I'm going to be doing is I'm just going to make my own NPC wrapper class. So I'm just going to call it NPC. And this NPC is going to contain some information which I want to be able to modify. So I want the NPC to have a name and I want it to have a skin. Now skins in Minecraft are represented by two strings, a texture and a signature value. So I need both of these, so string texture and string signature. And also we're going to store the actual entity in this class as well. So it's called a mannequin and I'm just going to call it entity. So I'm going to create my constructor to initialize these variables. So public NPC, so string name, string texture, and string signature. This name is name, this texture is texture, and this signature is signature. I'm also going to pass in a location, which is where I want the NPC to actually spawn. So location, location. And then we can just spawn a mannequin at this location. So this entity is, and we're going to cast it to mannequin. Location, get world, spawn entity, location, then entity type dot mannequin. And I'm also going to create a getter for the entity, which will be important later. But in terms of the NPC, this is pretty much the base of it. So now I'm going to create a handler class, so NPC handler, and this is how I'm going to be choosing to interface with the NPC. So I'm just going to use a command to spawn an NPC. So implements command executor, and we need to write the command. So public boolean on command, command sender, command string label string array args, and return false. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check if the sender is not an instance of player, then I just want to return, so only players will be able to execute the command. I'm just going to make a player variable as well by casting sender. And just to test, we'll just spawn the NPC how it is at the moment. So NPC is new NPC, and we need a location, so player.getLocation. The name is going to be test, and the texture and signature I'm just going to leave blank for now. So I'm going to register my command in the main class. So NPC handler is new NPC handler. Then get command npc.setExecutor handler. And I need to put my command in the plugin.yml. So let's just run this and see what happens. So I'm on my server now, so I'm just going to run the command /npc. As you can see, it spawns me a new mannequin. Now this is the default mannequin, so it doesn't have a skin or a name or anything. And as you can see, I can just punch it about. But here's the thing, I assume you want different behavior for this. So for example, if you right click it, it will send you to a server or something like that. So in my command, I'm going to provide an argument for the name that I want to give the NPC. So the command is going to be /npc name. And then whichever name the player provides is going to be the name here. So string name is the first argument, and then we can replace test here with name. And now whatever the player inputs will be set to the name of the NPC. However, as you saw before, the name wasn't visible. So how do we do that? I'm going to head back to my NPC class, and what I'm going to do with this entity is I'm going to set a custom name of component.text and then the name. But for it to be visible all the time, we need to set the custom name visible. So entity set custom name visible, true. So let's try this now and see how it looks. So now let's do /npc and let's give it a name. So for example, Brandon. Now you can see it has the name Brandon and a description of NPC, but the behavior is still the same as before. But what if I don't want this NPC here? Now that text under the name is what's called a description, and to get rid of it you can just do entity.setDescription, and we're going to set it to null to just remove it. Now if I summon an NPC with the name Brandon, as you can see it just has a normal name tag of Brandon and the NPC text is gone. So how do I change the skin? How do I actually get these texture and signature values? So in my NPC command, I'm going to have the player provide another argument, which is the username of the skin that they want. So string skin name is the second argument. But how do I actually get the data from this name? Now if you've seen my previous tutorial about a nickname system, you already know the answer to this question, but we're going to have to query the Mojang API. Now Mojang actually provide us with two really useful APIs. There's this first one which allows us to get an ID from any player name, and then this second one which from the ID allows us to get the skin value and the signature, which is the data that we need. So I'm actually going to create a utility class to be able to query these APIs with any username that we want. So I'm just going to create a utility class called Mojang API. Now if you look at the responses from these URLs, you can see that they're in JSON format for both of them. So I'm just going to create a method to return whatever the data is in JSON format. So public static JSON object from Google JSON, get JSON data, and I'll just pass a URL string here. So I'm going to surround all of this in a try and catch, and I'm just going to catch generic exception because I'm lazy, and I'm going to print stack trace because I'm lazy. And if it can't find it, I'm just going to return null. So the first thing we need to do is create a URL from this URL string. So URL is URI.create URL string.toURL. And then we need to create a connection. So URL connection is URL.openConnection. And then we need to connection.connect. So now we're just going to read the actual input from the data that's returned. So we need an input stream reader. Let's just call it reader. Is new input stream reader. And then we're going to cast to input stream the connection.getContent. And now to get this in a JSON format, we can get a JSON object. Let's just call it data. Is JSON parser.parseReader.getAsJSON object. And then we're just going to return data. Now we have this method to get the JSON data from any URL. We can actually start querying these specific URLs. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to put them into my code. So private static final string, let's call this one profile URL. And that's going to be the one with the name. And I'm going to replace the name with a placeholder. So just name like this. And I'm going to do the exact same for the session server URL, which is the longer one. So private static final string session URL. We're going to paste this. And I'm actually going to put these on new lines so I can see it a bit better. And I'm going to replace the ID here with UUID like this. So let's start with the session URL because it's the more complicated one. So I'm going to create a public static string array, get skin data of a string UUID, and I'm just going to put a return null at the end. I'll do a null check for UUID as well, so if UUID is null, then I'm just going to return null. Otherwise, we're going to get our JSON object data is get JSON data, and then we can put our session URL in here like this. But we need to replace this UUID with our UUID. So replace UUID with UID. And I should probably do a null check here as well. So if data is null, then return null. Otherwise, we're going to start extracting the data. So if we look at the location of the data we care about, you can see it's actually in this properties JSON array. So the first thing I'm going to do is get all of the properties. So list JSON element, properties, I need to import list, is data.getAsJSON properties.toList, .aslist. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to loop through every properties object and just check that we're in the right one by ensuring that name is equal to textures. So for JSON element in properties, let's get the element as a JSON object first. So JSON is element.getAsJSON object. And then let's get the name from this JSON object. So JSON.get name, get a string. So now we need to check if this name is here, and if it is, it needs to be equal to textures. So if the name is not there, so if it's null, or the name is not equals to textures, then we just want to continue in the loop and ignore this property. Otherwise, when the name is equal to textures, we know we're in the right one, so we can just extract the value and the signature as our two strings. So string texture is JSON.get value, .get a string, and then string signature is JSON.get signature, get a string. And now because this method requires a string array, I'm just going to return a new string array of these two fields. So return new string array, texture, signature. So we can now get the skin data from the UUID, but we also need to write another method to get the UID from the name. So public static string array get skin data, but this is going to be string name and not string UID. And I'm going to do a null check of name as well. It's not really necessary, but it's good to do. I see I'm getting an error because these two methods have the same signature, so I'm going to make this one skin data from name, and this one skin data from UID. Okay. Luckily, this name API is much simpler. It's literally just the ID and a name. So all we need to do is check if the name is here, and if it is, then return it. So like before, let's get the JSON object data, get JSON data, and this time we're going to use the profile URL, but with our name replaced with the name given in the method. And then string ID is data.get ID.get a string. And then we're just going to pass this ID into our UID method. So return get skin data from UID ID. And there we go, we can now get the skin data from the name and from the UID. If you want a better explanation as to how this works, I suggest you watch my nickname system tutorial, because that has a much more in-depth explanation of how this works. So now we have this util method, let's go back to our command, and let's get the skin data from this name. So string array skin data is Mojang API, get skin data from name, skin name. And we can replace the texture and signature with the two values returned in the skin data. So skin data 0 and skin data 1. Now that's all well and good, but we actually need to apply the skin to our mannequin in our NPC class. So to do this, we're going to need to create a profile property, and make sure you're importing the paper one. Let's just call it skin. It's going to be a new profile property of textures, and it's going to be the texture and the signature. And now we need to create a profile for this mannequin with this skin property. So resolvable profile is resolvable profile dot resolvable profile to return a builder, and then add property skin and then build. And then we can set the property to the mannequin by using entity.setProfile and then putting in our profile. So now let's try running this with a given name and see what happens. So now let's say I want an NPC called Merlin, but I want the skin to be of the Minecraft account Simply Merlin. And just like that, as you can see, it's called Merlin, but it has the skin of Simply Merlin. So now let's look into how we can have custom behavior for left and right clicking the NPC, because right now if you left click it will just punch the NPC as if it was actual player, and we don't want that. So what I'm going to do in my handler class is I'm going to create a set of all the NPCs that I've spawned. So private final set of NPC, let's just call it NPCs, is going to be a new hash set. And when we spawn the NPCs, I'm actually going to add the NPCs to this hash set. So npcs.add NPC. And you'll see why this is important in just a second. So the way I'm going to detect if you left or right click an entity is by using different events. So this class needs to implement listener because I want to listen to events. And we're going to have two event handlers that we're going to listen to. So the first is going to be on entity damage by entity, there we go, and it's going to be the entity damage by entity event. And the second is going to be public void on player interact at entity, player interact at entity event. So we're going to use the damage event to detect left clicking and the interact event to check right clicking. So I'll focus on left clicking first. So the first thing we need to do is ensure that the entity damaged was a mannequin and the entity that tried to damage it was a player. So if the event.getEntity is not an instance of mannequin, then I want to return. And if the event.getDamager is not an instance of player, then I want to return as well. And now because we know that these entities is going to be a mannequin and a player, we can just create mannequin and player variables to represent them. So mannequin, mannequin, and then we can cast to mannequin event.getEntity. And this is safe to do because we've already checked that it is a mannequin. And we can do the same for player. So player is player event.getDamager. Now this is where the set of NPCs is really important, because how now do we get our NPC from our mannequin? And the best way that I can think to do this is to just loop through all the NPCs we have, which of course includes the mannequin entity, and just check that it is this same mannequin. So I'm going to create a method to get an NPC from any given mannequin. So private NPC get NPC from mannequin mannequin, and I'm just going to loop through every NPC in NPCs. If npc.getEntity.getUniqueID is the same as mannequin.getUniqueID, then we know that this is the right NPC. So let's return this NPC. Otherwise, we will return null. So it goes through each NPC that we've spawned, and it checks the entity to make sure it's the same, so we know that we have the right NPC. So let's go back to our event, and we can now get the NPC. So NPC is get NPC mannequin. And then let's just do an NPC check. So if the NPC is null, then we're just going to return. So what I'm going to do in my NPC class is I'm actually going to create two methods. I'm going to create a public void on left click with a player, and a public void on right click with a player. So if we go back to our event, now that we have the NPC, we can just do NPC on left click and then player. And I don't want the player to be able to actually damage the mannequin, so I'm just going to cancel the event. So event.setCancel to true. So for an example, if I just, in my left click method here, if I just send the player a message, let's just make the NPC say ouch, and I will make it red as well. So let's try this now and see if it works. So you'll see now if I spawn an NPC and I try to, it doesn't do anything. Of course it doesn't do anything because I haven't actually registered my event listener. So we need to go to our main class and then bucket.getPluginManager.register events, handler, this. So let's try that again. There we go. Now it says ouch in chat whenever I punch the NPC. As you can see, it says ouch. So now left click is working. We can do pretty much the same logic for our right click. So the first thing we're going to do is check that if the event that was right clicked is an instance of Mannequin, the entity that was right-clicked, not the event, sorry. And if it's not a Mannequin, then let's return. Otherwise, we can create our Mannequin variable. So Mannequin is Mannequin event.getRightClicked. And we can do the same thing. We can get an NPC from our Mannequin. So NPC is get NPC Mannequin. Then if the NPC was not found, so if it's null, then we're just going to return. And this is something with this specific event as well. This actually fires twice for the same right click, one for each hand. So we need to make sure we only run the code if it is using the main hand. So it only runs once. So if event.getHand is not equal to equipment slot.hand, then return. So now any code after this will only run if it's the main hand, which should only fire once. So now I can do NPC on right click, event.getPlayer, and then we can cancel the event as well. So just so we have a bit of output and can see what's happening, I'm going to send another message to the player if they right click. So player.sendMessage, and then this component will be something like you right clicked. So let's just run this and see that it's all working correctly. So now if I punch the NPC, it says ouch, and if I right click, it says you right clicked. So let's just add some behavior to this NPC. The first thing I want to change is that I'm able to push this NPC around, which I don't want to do. So the way we can fix that is by simply doing entity.setImmovable true. And now it shouldn't be able to move. But let's say I wanted some other behavior as well. Let's say that I want this NPC to be holding an apple, and then when I right click, it gives me an apple. So because Mannequin is actually a living entity, as you can see, it extends living entity, it has a proper inventory and armor, and you can just set it like every other entity. So let's do entity.getEquipment.setItem in main hand, and then new item stack material.apple. And I'm actually going to change the description to say right click for an apple. So entity.set description component.text right click for an apple, and let's make this yellow. And now when the player right clicks, instead of just sending them a message, I'm going to give them a new apple. So player.getInventory.add item, new item stack, material.apple. And now let's just run the server and see if this works. So let's see what happens now. So NPC with the name Merlin and skin simply Merlin. There we go, it says Merlin. Right click for an apple. We left click and he says ouch, and we right click and we are given an apple, and we can just keep getting apples. So there we go, that is a super simple way to create NPCs for your Minecraft server. Now obviously you can get much more sophisticated than this. You can create like a GUI to edit all of the settings of the NPC, but I'll leave you to figure that out on your own. That's all from me, thank you for watching.